Welcome to Inside the Arena, your source for everything off the ice, off the court, and outside the field of play. With your hosts, KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and KOMO Senior Reporter Chris Daniels.
Please. Bill, be quiet over there. Bill Fesh, always. Bill. Yeah, we love Bill. Bill's over there cheering us on. We're back for episode number 17, Niko, and I miss you. We're not in the same studio right now.
You know, here's the thing: we will be next week, unless the Mariners make the playoffs and I'm on the road in Houston or Baltimore or something. So, as much as I want to be back with you, maybe it's a good thing if I'm not next week.
Yeah, well, you know, if that happens, I think a lot of people in Seattle would be happy, and a lot of people in the Mariners front office would be happy because it's been a bumpy couple of months, and a bumpy couple of months as well for the Pac-12 conference. It seems like that whole situation is changing by the day. We record at a certain time, and unfortunately, sometimes it airs, and the Pac-12 conference has changed again. That is something we'll get into again on this episode. What I like to call a special episode of Inside the Arena, because we, have a partnership with Iconic Sonics, our friends at Iconic Sonics, in terms of an interview that we did with Ed Tapscott. He was the first hire, get this, of the NBA's expansion Charlotte Bobcats, and we talked to him about what it's like to build a franchise really from the ground up, maybe some lessons for Seattle, part of a longer conversation with the Iconic Sonics crew that you'll hear a portion of in just a second. And we also received an exclusive look, Niko. We love to throw around that word exclusive, but this is true in this case, an exclusive look at the secret Sonics stash, say that 5 times fast, in Seattle. The history has never left Seattle, Niko.
Well, first of all, I think the word exclusive in local news can be used inaccurately quite often, so I like that you actually had the exclusive. And B, I felt like I was a kid in the 90s again watching your story, so it was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to bring some more of that into this show.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in a second, but first, what we do every week, we touch them all, the 4 corners. That's where the crowd gets excited. We like to touch them all, touch all the bases. Niko, what's positive this week for you in the world of sports and the business off the field?
Yeah, that's the thing. So if you're talking on the field, it's okay, the Mariners have made it interesting. The Seahawks are 3-0. But off the field, what I really like this week is the fact that the Cougs are drawing really good ratings on these games that are on CW. And yes, Seattle CW is KOMO's sister station where this show airs, okay? But here's the deal. When all this disillusion, so to speak, at least in that current form, or in that former form of the Pac-12 is going on, it was this notion that just because WSU is in Pullman that they aren't a desirable brand. Well, they're showing, as they did, the Apple Cup did, as they did with the Portland State game, that they draw in the Seattle market. And everything that the WSU officials have said is true, that the Cougs genuinely do draw a huge TV audience, really not just in Seattle and in the state of Washington, but across the country. And the numbers are telling that the CW is not necessarily known as like always having football like some of the more traditional networks for the last, however many decades. Certainly the CW has made some great inroads in recent years with sports. But the fact that the Cougs are drawing the numbers that they are, now they're not numbers that are going to knock the Super Bowl off the pedestal. Yeah. However, they're good numbers, especially considering that people are still kind of getting used to the idea that the CW is a home for college football. So credit to the officials at WSU and the survival of the Pac-12, putting it on a national network like that, where you can be in Pullman, Seattle, or in, Maine or Miami, Florida, and watching the Cougs is pretty cool stuff. And that's my positive, that they have drawn and made the most out of that deal.
Yeah, and they did better than Oregon State last week on the CW. It was a Friday night game against San Jose State. The numbers, at least in Seattle, were better total households than almost anything else on television. KOMO, the mothership, had pretty good numbers that night on a Friday night, but across the board against the other local stations, the Washington State Cougars were victorious with good numbers there as well on a local level. I'll tell you what I like this week, and that is the current state of affairs, although it's changing by the day with Pac-12 expansion. I talked about it last week. Didn't really love the first move. Didn't really like this second move that they apparently tried to make. So I like where they are as we speak right now as we're recording this by staying west of the Rockies and not expanding or trying to expand to Memphis or South Florida or any of those other schools that were discussed that were part of the American Tulane, UTSA. That would not have felt like the Pac-12 conference. So what gets me excited is if, say, the Cougs and Beavs and the rest of the Pac-12 add a Gonzaga in basketball. I think that is a package that you can sell to broadcasters when they're out fishing for TV rights.
You want an outside-the-box idea that I've kind of warmed up to in recent days?
What's that?
You think about some of these FCS powerhouses like North Dakota State and South Dakota State that have they're always competing for championships. They're always beating FBS teams. If you get to a point where you want to add a couple more schools and kind of grow some brands, and almost like when these professional leagues draft athletes based purely on potential, I think that could be. Listen, they're not markets, they're not anything like that, but it could be some really fun, somewhat convenient travel for fans in the Northwest. Hopefully, you just get the UNLVs of the world to work out again at this recording, but I think it's an outside the box idea that I wouldn't mind seeing happening.
Well, Niko, do not forget Montana and Montana State, the Grizzlies and the Bobcats.
Ryan Divish would kill me if I did that.
Oh, boy. That is they were involved with the Pac way back when, but there is a question financially if that would work for those schools to go up to the next level. Okay, so what don't you like this week as we head towards the third corner? Yeah,
well, you're positive right there. One aspect of it is my negative, and I know for sure I've ranted about it on this show because it's one of my pet peeves in general, is you see a lot of reporting, if you want to call it that, on X, formerly known as Twitter, where a reporter breaks this story. It's definitely happening. Now, it's happened with other leagues in the past, but we saw it. We saw several, Chris, I know you know this, inaccurate reports about schools potentially joining this conglomerate of the Pac, whatever it ends up being. And this is what happens. You have folks that want a certain narrative or message out there that give a reporter some information, and then you run with it because you trust that source. Not that you or I would do that. We have not. But, you just got to be more careful like you and I are with that sort of thing. So that's what I lament, is that so much of the conference realignment can be driven in some ways by what presidents are seeing on social. Listen, Gonzaga may end up in this league. And like you said, and I think it'd be a great thing. But it was reporting that it was definitively done by some pretty high profile folks until Gonzaga came out and just said no. Now I'm still of the school of thought it's probably going to happen, just was premature in that way. But gosh, I saw some decently reputable reporters saying that UConn was coming to the Pac-12, which would be the silliest thing. Yeah, it's not happening, and maybe it will one day, but that it's the Wild West for all the wrong ways when you're talking about conference realignment on social media. And I just hate it because here's the deal. People see it. They believe it as fact. And sometimes those people who believe it as fact are the people making the big decisions. And those decisions are at least somewhat influenced by that. I hate it. Let's be more responsible, just like Chris Daniels and Niko Tamurian are.
Okay, I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to be serious for a second as we round the four corners. It's not fun to talk about. It's difficult to talk about. I've had a chance to interview Macklemore over the years. I don't want to get into the geopolitical issues with you here, Niko, on this podcast. But he has had a long history with the local sports franchises. Sang a song, as you know, about Dave Niehaus. The M's have played Can't Hold Us at the seventh inning stretch. The Kraken and Sounders count him as an investor. The Seahawks have had him around for events. It certainly seems like that time is coming to an end based on recent events. Again, not to get into the geopolitical issues here, but I think that there's a certain sadness with how Ben has been a supporter of the local franchises, and it appears that interest is not going to be reciprocated here in the future based on recent events. Okay, I lowered my voice here. Let's talk about something. Let's talk about something more positive, shall we? And this is where I use the air horn that you would hear at a future Sonics game. All right. There is positive news outside the four corners, Niko, as it comes to the NBA here in the Supersonic Minute. We're not necessarily talking about the Supersonics, but we are talking about the NBA. What's the good news here?
Yeah, I think this is really cool news. So we know the Portland Trailblazers left Root Sports, as did the Kraken. And so the Trailblazers were looking for a new local partner. They found it in our Sinclair affiliate down in Portland, K2, K-A-T-U. So that's going to be really cool because in the Portland market, those games will air on that station, K2. Now, how that relates to us here in Seattle is KUNS, Seattle CW, this station that this Inside the Arena plays on, as far as linear TV is concerned, will air at least 10 of those Portland Trailblazers games. All of those games will be aired in the Seattle market, whether it's on KUNS or KUNS Point 2. If you have one of the rabbit ear digital antennas, you can find that quite easily. And that's really cool because we're not just talking about watching the Blazers, okay? We are talking about what we talk about on the show often, the hopeful and soon return of the Sonics. And you know, hey, we already got Trailblazers on our station. You never know what can happen with the Sonics, right? So we're showing that the NBA is going to be on in this market again, and it's going to be a nice placeholder until we get those Sonics playing here in Seattle again. So really cool. And our Sinclair affiliate in Salt Lake City is the local partner of the Jazz as well. So really cool stuff for the NBA and our parent company. You love to see it, Chris.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how this all works out for the Blazers. They are, again, going down this path with over-the-air broadcasts all over the region, including, as you just mentioned, on the CW here in Seattle. They're also selling their package to fans directly. So this is where the industry is headed right now. We've seen it with the Kraken. We've seen it now with the Blazers. They both have left Root Sports, going out on their own, and that's going to hopefully set the trail for a Supersonics return. And I didn't mean that. I didn't do that on purpose. The Blazers blazing a trail maybe here in Seattle. Hey, speaking about the Sonics in this Supersonic Minute, had a chance here in the last week to go into the super secret Sonics vault that is here in Seattle. The history, as you know, has never left Seattle. Part of the confusion, the question I get all the time is, what happened to all the history? What happened to all the pennants and the banners and the retired jerseys? Are they in Oklahoma City right now? The answer is no. They are here in Seattle under the watchful eye of the Museum of History and Industry. And I had a chance to talk to Leonard Garfield, the executive director, about this whole deal that keeps the Sonics history in Seattle. Here's just a bit of what he had to say. Why do you think it's important to keep that history preserved?
You know, I think sports is one of those things that brings a community together. And we've seen that. We've seen that with our championship Seahawks, with all the teams that have been successful in Seattle. And the Sonics did it in a way that we still remember. People identify with the Sonics. It's part of who we are as a community. So we want to keep that safe and sound. And the hope is the Sonics will come back to Seattle. They'll be part of our future.
So the banners that were up in the ceiling, the championship banners, all that kind of stuff, are they in Oklahoma City?
The championship banners are here in Seattle. Some of the practice sneakers are still here in Seattle. The trophy is here in Seattle. We've got a lot of the heart and soul of the Sonics, just like so many fans do. And we're going to keep that safe right here in their hometown.
So this stuff never left?
Never left. It was a deal we made with the Thunder that we'd take care of it, we'd preserve it. It may have been part of the sale, but we weren't going to see it leave our city.
What do you think that means, that Clay Bennett decided to leave this stuff here in Seattle under the preservation of Mohi?
Well, I think the Thunder understood that the Sonics really are a part of Seattle's history. They're really our team. And while it may have been sold to Oklahoma City, the team spirit resided in the city, and I think Clay Bennett recognized that.
Yeah, and so Clay Bennett had to sign off on us even shooting that material at Mohi. And just for people who aren't watching but listening, Leonard was doing that interview in front of the 79 championship trophy, which is on display at Mohi.
Chris, may I add, this is why I like our show here, and this is why I like our teamwork. You know, We say it in the show description every day. I'm in the locker room talking to these guys.
Yeah.
You're coming up, you have these ideas that I'm sitting there like, wow, that's really good. I was into this story from start to finish. And I think that's a really important thing to remember because, again, you've been on the story 20 years. Even just in my relatively short time in Seattle, that's the one thing I always get is like, well, are they going to be the Sonics? And stuff you and I know, yeah. So what happens to this? And you answered that for us. And I think that just really further builds the anticipation. Like this thing is happening as we know. I mean, it's not definite, obviously. We're not, but we know the momentum is there. And we know that this further feeds just all of that excitement.
Well, and Leonard talked about that in the fabric of the Sonics history in the museum, and for a lot of people in this community, I think he summed it up well. You can watch more of that at KOMOnews.com. Hey, I mentioned off the top, Niko, our friends at Iconic Sonics. You know them well.
We love them.
Yeah, we did a joint interview, a partnership with them, and it'll be part of an interview that you'll hear at length with Iconic Sonics, but it's of interest, I think, to our listeners and our viewers. The man, his name is Ed Tapscott, and he's not necessarily a household name here in Seattle, but he was in Charlotte 20 years ago when we talk about expansion. He was the first person hired by the Bobcats to build that organization from the ground up. You remember the Hornets had left Charlotte for New Orleans. They were awarded an expansion franchise. It's the last time the NBA expanded. And we talked to him about what that process was like, how much work went into starting up that franchise. And this is part of an interview you will hear with Iconic Sonics, Ed Tapscott. Before you went down to Charlotte.
Well, actually, my wife worked for Bob. And that was really the connection. As I described to Brett the other day, I was the husband with the better backhand. We used to play tennis against each other. So I didn't use the backhand, but so much. You don't want to whip the boss all the time. So it was my NBA connection and obviously my wife's long history. She worked for BET for about 19 years. And when they went public and had all of a sudden a lot of capital to spend, one of the ideas that popped up was, what about an NBA franchise? And so there were a number of discussions. I had a chance to introduce Bob to certain people in the NBA, most importantly, David Stern. And so when an opportunity came up to compete for the new franchise, he was platformed to do so. Interestingly enough, prior to the new franchise coming to Charlotte, Bob actually had discussions with George Shinn to buy the existing Hornets that were in market at the time. And at the end of the day, George decided not to sell it and move it to New Orleans. And then Bob ends up in Charlotte anyway. And so with a new franchise. So that's sort of the story of how this came about. It was pretty competitive because there was a competing group with Larry Bird in it that was looking to buy into Charlotte at the same time. So it certainly wasn't a done deal. And at the end of the day, Bob prevailed. And the next thing you know, I'm on the ground in Charlotte working around the clock, which is part and parcel of the new franchise.
So this was a partnership built on the tennis court, game, set, and match, so to speak.
Yeah, let's put it this way. I don't know if it was set up there, but it didn't hurt that I had the better backhand. That's for sure.
So what is this like when you're employee number one of an expansion franchise? What's the first thing you do, or what do you try to do in the first few weeks?
Well, after the terror of the night before, all right. And what I mean by that is you're sort of like the dog who chases cars and then you actually catch one. And now all of a sudden you have to decide, what am I going to do with this thing I've just caught? So you end up, the flight down to Charlotte with Bob was just a culmination of conversations that had gone on before about what are the first starting steps. So the first steps to there is to meet up with the Sports Commission, the mayor's office, all of the people who were part and parcel of the discussions to bring the NBA back to Charlotte. The Charlotte Hornets left under some controversy. And as a result, the city said, we really want another franchise. The deal was that they would build a brand new building to house this new franchise. And so the first start was connecting with people in the city who were the folks that were critical to the whole process of a new franchise being relocated there. And so I got to know just about everybody on the sports commission, on the city council, in the mayor's office, the architects of the building, because we were building in parallel to building the franchise. We were building a brand new arena. And so you get started essentially trying to ground yourself in this new community and hopefully give them a chance to know who you are and work with them collaboratively on building a vision for a new franchise. And part of that was so important there, which is not a problem you're going to have in Seattle. Seattle was an avid supporter of Sonics. The Hornets left in a bit of disarray. So I really did have to do quite a bit of work sort of establishing where did they go wrong? What did they do that caused the schism between the community and the franchise? That problem won't exist in Seattle. And so a lot of that was just actually going and meeting people and listening, just sitting down and finding out where did this go wrong and how do we start a new path, our own sort of golden path to build this thing correctly. So I had a lot of chicken dinners. More importantly, as I spoke to the uniqueness of each market, people in Charlotte like to do business by breakfast. And it's the only time in my life I ever drank sweet tea with breakfast.
I'm already learning that starting an expansion franchise involves playing tennis and breakfast.
Interesting thing about breakfast in Charlotte, you know you don't have a deal when they invite you to a third breakfast. They're just too nice to tell you no.
One of the things that gets discussed when the Seattle conversation comes up, people say, hey, the NBA can snap their fingers and start an expansion franchise and play the following year. But you and I both know that it's not easy. We saw with the NHL and the Seattle Kraken, they needed a 2.5-year runway to get going so the other teams in the league could plan for it, other franchises could plan for it. There's also a lot of work in building up infrastructure. And I'm curious your perspective on this, the idea that not only are you getting a breakfast with a lot of people, you're trying to build out a marketing department, you're trying to find a local TV rights deal. We didn't talk about digital at that time necessarily, but a TV rights deal so people can see the games. What goes into that process when building up an expansion franchise?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, most people think you start with drafting players. You don't. You start with building an infrastructure for business. You have to have a marketing wing. You have to have a ticket sales organization. You have to have a community outreach section. You also need all of the supportive elements of internal management, an accounting department, payroll, all of those types of things. So that's really where you start. And that's a lead in, well, we had 2.5 years. Part of what's so important to do, particularly in a competitive marketplace like Charlotte, because we had football there, but we had a little different dynamic. We only had one other, what I would say, purely professional team in the marketplace in the Carolina Panthers, but we had NASCAR. And so NASCAR is a force in that part of Western North Carolina and throughout the South. So that was like another franchise in that area. We also had Wachovia Bank at that time was headquartered there, and they had a golf tournament called the Wachovia, aptly brand. That was a major franchise in that community that everyone supported. And then we had ACC basketball. So when you go into any marketplace, you must understand you are competing for discretionary dollars. Anybody has in their pocket only X number of dollars that they can commit to fun and entertainment. And you are competing with other franchises, other sports industries, even other entertainment industries like the movies and concerts and all the rest to grab your portion of that dollar. And so as a result, a strong business infrastructure, a strong marketing and branding operation is the first step towards building the relationships to a certain part of that marketplace that you can rely upon for your success. And so with that comes, like you said, media deals. We don't say television anymore. We don't even say, if you say TV, you got to put linear in front of it. These are all the new innovations since my time there. But you're looking for a media deal that goes across the gamut of all the forms of media that now exist. And they have become increasingly complex. And the relationships have become increasingly complex between cable, broadcast television, direct TV, streaming services, and all the rest. So one of the things that we did and turned out to be a mistake is that we actually tried to, in parallel, start our own regional sports network. It was too much to do in the same time span of trying to start an NBA franchise. And oh, by the way, I also inherited a WNBA franchise that had to be resuscitated, and only had 4 months to do that when I first hit market. So we had a lot going on. And so the more you can streamline your function and focus on your NBA franchise, which is the cash cow, the better off you'll be.
Well, I wanted to ask you, going through this process and being the last NBA franchise to do it, what kind of lessons did you learn, especially, again, the parallel between Seattle and the controversy with the previous team? You mentioned that off the top and the challenges that maybe created in the marketplace. I mean, what lessons did you learn at this, and maybe the best thing that you accomplished, and maybe the thing that you would say required improvement for the next regime?
Yeah, I think the best thing we did was take a very measured approach to how we would build our team. I remember I told this story. I told Bernie that I would not overrule him on things unless they made me gag. And there was a time after Bernie had absorbed a certain number of losses. And remember, I made Bernie both head coach and general manager. And I said, part of the reason I did that was to make sure that there was a certain consistency of approach all the way through the building phase. Now, if you come to me as general manager and tell me you're not getting along with your head coach, I'm going to be extremely concerned because you're the same guy. And I said, at some point, Bernie, kick yourself upstairs to being a GM and hire yourself a new coach as you feel you've got this thing going in the right direction and you've platformed this new coach. I said, we were trying to do that to avoid the whole idea of having a new coach in there for 2 years or a year and a half. You fire that guy, and now you have a whole new approach to how you want to build your team because you got a new coaching staff. We thought we wanted a measured, step-by-step approach to build the team. That is why I incorporated those two positions together, which I generally wouldn't agree on doing. But in a new franchise, I thought it was important. Bernie and Bernie never had a problem with each other. Bernie and I never had a problem with each other, but there was one player transaction that he wanted because he had absorbed a lot of losses. And he came to me and I said, well, Bernie, let me tell you exactly how I feel. This is the gag one. I don't like this one at all for a number of reasons, but it's yours to make. I'm not going to override you, but I will tell you, he belongs to you. And I said, sleep on it. Early the next morning, Bernie's always up early. Early the next morning, I got the call. You know what, Tap? Never mind. And we went on. And that was the biggest disagreement we ever had right there. And that wasn't hardly a disagreement. That was working through our process. And we came to an outcome that we could both agree on. So I think we did a pretty good job in that part of what we were doing with the franchise. I thought from a basketball standpoint, Bernie did a masterful job of maintaining flexibility as we were ramping up. On the negative side is we did television very poorly. And that has a major impact on your ability to sell your franchise in your marketplace. You must have as broad as many points of distribution as possible. You have to reach out to this marketplace because while you're going to have a lot of old fans and you're going to get a lot of old Sonics fans coming back, the future of the franchise is built on making new fans and making sure that you tap into the youth market so that you can grow your own fans because you're in a crowded marketplace. You have a baseball franchise. You have a football franchise. You have Major League Soccer that is impactful there. So you're going to have to grow some of your fans. So the idea of having the type of outreach with your media platforms is extremely important, and that's one thing we didn't do well. And if I had to do it all over again, we would have made a very different decision with regard to media.
Ed Tapscott there again, the first hire with the Charlotte Bobcats, talking about starting up the expansion franchise. Niko, you heard him say Bernie multiple times. That's Bernie Bickerstaff, who people in Seattle will remember as the coach of the Sonics, was hired there in Charlotte as well. And I think what you heard from Ed, and you can hear in a long-form conversation over at Iconic Sonics, is that you really have to focus, if you're starting up a franchise in Seattle, on the RSN. You've got to figure out the marketplace and any sort of bad memories that may exist from the previous franchise. You've got to figure out how to move forward and start anew. And Niko, I think really this is a good lesson from Ed for all of us in life. It's all about breakfast and tennis.
And sweet tea, right?
And sweet tea.
But, that was cool to hear, because, again, this is something that we all hope is we're going to be seeing firsthand, right? And maybe that was 20 years ago with the Charlotte franchise. However, interesting to see some of the pitfalls they went through and what we hope we see here in the next couple of years.
Well, and to what we were saying earlier, that's why the Blazers and the Kraken are doing what they're doing right now after Root Sports is going to over-the-air distribution and trying to get as many eyeballs as possible to build the franchise. Okay, before we go, I forgot last week, you reminded me, you cannot finish a game without having one of these. Right? The final buzzer. Final thoughts?
Yeah,
Niko?
I think that this is, we've talked about this before on the show, but my goodness, what a wildly impactful few months of Seattle sports we have coming up. Certainly the shakeup of the Pac-12, while it's not directly in the Seattle market per se with the Huskies or something, that's something a lot of people care about here. With what you and I are anticipating and hoping with the Sonics coming up, and the performance of some of these franchises, the Seahawks, the Mariners, and all this, it's just going to be what we see happen over the next few months, Chris, is going to be stuff that, we remember for a while, but will have impacts that last well beyond the current season or calendar year that we're in.
And we are cataloging it week by week, Niko.
Yeah.
17 weeks already. Bill Fesh has been up by our side. He's just right off camera. He's doing everything here to make this show work week by week over the last 17 weeks. The likes of Kenny Mayne, Lenny Wilkins, Pat Chun from the University of Washington, Ann McCoy from Washington State University, Damon Heward, Bob Thompson, former head of Fox Sports Networks. We talked about the World Cup. We've talked about women's sports. We've talked about off-the-pitch stuff with the Sounders and Rain. Whew, that's a lot, Niko.
That's what we're here for. That's why the show is a blast, my friend.
And we will do it all again next week, and maybe the Pac-12 will have a couple extra schools involved by then, too.
You've been listening to Inside the Arena with Niko and Chris. Please subscribe on your favorite platform. Until next time.